Walk down almost any street in America named Elm Street and count the elm trees. In most cities, the answer is 0. Elm Street is one of the most common road names in the country, a name that now refers to a tree that no longer lines it. 77 million American elms stood in 1930. By 1989, over 75% of them were dead. The disease that killed them arrived on a shipment of European furniture logs that nobody inspected for bark. The USDA caught it. They started a quarantine. Then a war broke out and the funding stopped. Before all of it, the American elm was the tree that defined what an American street looked like. Its trunk rose straight for 40 or 50 feet, then split into arching branches that spread outward and drooped at the tips. Less a tree than a cathedral made of wood. When two elms were planted on opposite sides of a street, their canopies met in the middle and formed a green tunnel. Entire neighborhoods lived under that canopy. Urban planters in the early 1900s planted them everywhere. The elm tolerated bad soil, road salt, air pollution, compacted roots, and drought. It grew fast and it grew large. City after city lined its streets with a single species. Row after row, block after block, root system touching root system underground. New Haven, Connecticut planted so many that it became known as the Elm City. Washington, D.C. lined the National Mall with them. By 1930, an estimated 77 million American elms stood in urban landscapes across the country. Think about that number, 77 million trees of the same species, planted shoulder to shoulder, their roots grafted together underground, genetically similar, sharing the same vulnerabilities. It was the most extensive urban monoculture in American history, and nobody used that word at the time, because nobody thought of it as a risk. Then a shipment of elm logs arrived from Europe. In 1930, furniture makers in Ohio imported unpeeled elm logs from the Netherlands to use as veneer for cabinets and tables. Buried in the bark were European elm bark beetles, and riding on the beetles was a fungus called Ophiostoma ulmi, later identified as a pathogen that originated in Asia. The fungus entered the sapwood through the feeding wounds the beetles carved. It spread through the tree's vascular system, producing enzymes that broke down cell walls, clogging the vessels that carried water from roots to leaves. The trees starved from the inside. Leaves yellowed, branches wilted, and within 1 to 2 seasons, the trees were dead. The USDA detected it almost immediately. By 1934, a federal quarantine and eradication campaign was underway. Infected trees were identified, cut down, and burned. Sanitation crews traced beetle populations. The effort held the disease within 150 miles of New York City for nearly a decade. Then World War II started. Federal funding was redirected to the war effort. The quarantine program was gutted. The beetles kept moving. By the time the war ended, Dutch elm disease has spread beyond any possibility of containment. That's the detail I keep coming back to. A decade of containment. Working, documented, funded. Abandoned because the budget was needed elsewhere. And when the war ended, nobody restarted it. By the 1950s, the disease had reached Washington, D.C. By 1960, it was in Chicago. By 1970, Minneapolis. Cities that had spent generations building their canopies watched them collapse in a matter of years. In Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, a city where 80% of street trees were American elm, the first 6 trees were lost in 1951. By the mid-1970s, the canopy was gone. The response made things worse. Cities sprayed DDT from trucks and aircraft to kill the bark beetles. It didn't work. The beetles lived under the bark where the spray couldn't reach them. But the DDT accumulated in the soil, entered the food chain through earthworms, and poisoned the birds that ate them. Robins dropped dead on the lawns beneath the dying elms. Rachel Carson documented it in Silent Spring, published in 1962. The elm program became one of the most damning examples of chemical pesticide failure. The spray killed the birds, but not the beetles. If you saw my video on how one genetic shortcut nearly destroyed America's corn crop, this is the same architecture, an entire system built on uniformity, exposed to a single threat that uniformity made inevitable. By 1976, fewer than 34 million of the original 77 million urban elms remained. The USDA estimated the cumulative economic loss, tree removal, replanting, property value decline, increased energy costs from lost shade in the billions. Elm Street kept its name, the trees didn't keep theirs. And then the cities made the same mistake again. The replacement tree of choice in many communities was ash, another single species. Planted in rows, block after block, the emerald ash borer arrived in Michigan in the early 2000s and began killing them. One monoculture replaced by another, both destroyed by an imported pest that arrived on uninspected wood. The disease is still active. Young elms are particularly susceptible. Most die before they reach reproductive age. Breeding programs at the USDA and several universities have spent decades trying to develop resistant American elm cultivars. A handful exist: Valley Forge, Jefferson, Princeton, but none are fully resistant. Every one of them can still be infected and killed by Dutch elm disease. The researchers working on them describe them as tolerant, not immune, and every elm cultivar currently for sale descends from a handful of surviving trees. The genetic base of the recovery effort is almost as narrow as the monoculture that created the problem. The USDA's quarantine records from the 30s are still in the archive. The eradication reports document every infected tree identified, every sanitation action taken, every mile of containment held. The program was working. The disease was confined to a single metropolitan region for nearly 10 years. The decision to defund it during the war was noted in the agency's own budget documents. Nobody reopened the program when the war ended. Nobody filed the request. For 100 years, the American elm defined what a street looked like in this country. Cities planted 77 million of them. The same species, the same shape, the same genetics. Because uniformity was beautiful, and nobody calculated what uniformity cost. A shipment of unpeeled logs from the Netherlands carried a beetle and a fungus into Ohio. The USDA found it, contained it, and then let it go when the budget ran out. The disease took the canopy, the DDT took the birds, and the cities that lost their elms replaced them with ash and waited for the next beetle to arrive. Elm Street. There are thousands of them in this country, and on most of them, not a single elm is left. Just the name, hanging on a green sign above a street that has no memory of the tree it was named for. If you're standing on one of those streets right now, I'd like to hear about it. Subscribe if you want to see what's next. The public archives was more than history, and it's been there all along. Just nobody opened it until now.